The evolution of medicine has been one of the greatest developments of the past century. Diseases that used to wipe out populations are now almost unheard of. And we have medicines to treat even the ordinary things in life, from headaches to stomach pains to runny noses. But then sometimes, even our best attempts at providing a solution can create problems that no one ever really anticipated. In the late 50s and early 60s, a German pharmaceutical company produced a drug called Redefining. It soon spread throughout Europe and Canada, where it was widely prescribed to women to treat morning sickness during pregnancy. In a suspicious coincidence, doctors soon began to notice an increasing number of birth defects in newborns. Children were being born with steel limbs, a condition where the long bones in the arms and legs simply failed to develop. It only took a few years to make the connection, tracing those deformed limbs to the thalidomide taken by the baby's mothers. After that, the drug was very quickly banned, but of course, it was too late for those babies affected. The March of Dimes places the number of children born with deformities caused by thalidomide at more than 10,000. And BBC called the experience one of the biggest medical tragedies of modern times. Now, what I'd like to do today is take a quick look at a different medical tragedy, one that actually does far more damage than deforming an arm or a leg, and yet most of us in the 21st century aren't even aware of it. It's a little thing called the pill. You might know it as birth control. Come with me as we look beyond the label and explore this well-known and well-used little solution. The question is, what does it actually do? The concept of birth control itself was introduced to America in the early 1900s by an outspoken feminist named Margaret Sanger. Her foundational assumption was quite simple. She said that in order to stand on an equal footing with men, women must be able to control their own bodies. So in 1957, the first birth control pill, or combined oral contraceptive, was made available to the general public. And according to the Huffington Post just last year, is still the #1 contraceptive for American women. Before we get into the details about how it works, though, we need to start off by laying the foundation with a basic medical definition of life itself. David Hullum holds a PhD in cell biology, and in 2007 he wrote that medical embryology textbooks have long equated fertilization with conception, and thus the beginning of a new human life. Essentially, every dictionary of the English language has defined conception as the fertilization of an egg by a sperm. In simpler terms, when an egg meets a sperm, you have a life. The fertilized egg, or the embryo, will then move on to the uterus, where it will implant itself and begin to grow. According to Dr. Tommy Mitchell, 22 chromosomes from the mother and 22 from the father are combined at the time of fertilization. At this point, the genetic makeup of the individual is determined. At this point, a unique individual begins to exist. So the pill itself has 3 mechanisms by which it stops the prevention of pregnancy. Let's take a look at each of these in turn. The first one is, of course, indicative ovulation, or preventing the unfertilized egg from leaving the ovary and meeting sperm. Since life doesn't exist until the egg and the sperm come together in fertilization, then the first mechanism lives up to its name, purely a preventative measure. The pill's second mechanism will make it more difficult for the sperm to travel to the egg, again, preventing fertilization and preventing life. The third and final mechanism will actually thin the lining of the uterus to the point that it becomes impossible, or nearly impossible, for that fertilized egg to implant itself. You might catch the subtle change in wording there. The third mechanism isn't just dealing with a sperm or an egg. It's dealing with an embryo, which is, by definition, a human life. According to Dr. Christine Seven, the third effect of the combined oral contraceptive is to alter the lining of the endometrium in such a way that the implantation of the fertilized egg, new life, becomes more difficult, if not impossible. The alteration of the endometrium provides a backup abortifacient method to prevent a pregnancy. The third mechanism of the pill performs an abortion, unknown and unannounced. The child's life is ended before anyone is even aware of its existence. Do you remember those 10,000 babies that were affected by thalidomide? We are a nation that responds very easily to those things that we can see. And so apparently, it's better to kill a child than to let one live with a deformed limb. One will lead you down in the band, but the other, that's the approval of the FDA. What's the difference? One of them is invisible. And who defends, who stands up for an invisible life? The third effect of this bill is medically indisputable. So you might wonder, why haven't we heard about it? Why isn't it making headlines or being criticized by the public? The answer here is rather deceptively simple. Do you remember that definition of life that we looked at a few minutes ago? Up until very recently, the medical community agreed that life begins at fertilization, when the egg and sperm create the embryo. So what's the problem? Dr. Benton points out that some within the scientific community are now changing the definition of life by shifting the moment of conception from fertilization to implantation. It's also interesting to note that according to Dr. David Stevens of the Christian Medical Association, a significant percentage of women still consider pregnancy to begin at fertilization. In other words, doctors and scientists are redefining life in order to justify taking the life of a human embryo. More often than not, they do so without women being fully aware of what the pill is doing to their bodies and to their child. Unfortunately, the pill itself isn't the only culprit here. The well-known morning-after pill is marketed as a backup plan. The Plan B emergency contraceptive works very similar to the birth control pill, but the circumstances are obviously a bit different. Dr. Benton points out that the likelihood that Plan B may cause an abortion is much greater than the birth control pill, simply because Plan B is more likely to exert its effect after fertilization has already occurred. If you look at the manufacturer's website, they will make it abundantly clear that Plan B is not an abortion pill. At which point you have to stop yourself and ask the question, whose definition of life are we using here? Dr. Stevens would hold a different view. He says that Plan B's label falsely assures women that they are not taking the life of a human being when they take the pill. All of this information leads up to a very logical question. Because we've established that oral contraceptives have the potential to save a life, but you might wonder, does it ever actually happen? Do we know how often it happens? Arriving at a 100% accurate number for how often that third mechanism comes into play would be virtually impossible, but we can do an estimate. So in the early 90s, Dr. Bobby McLaughlin set out to research this exact issue, taking into account a variety of different factors and variables. His final estimate placed the number of abortions caused by oral contraceptives at 4,170,000. And that figure is annually. According to Dr. J.C. Espinosa, that rate is statistically equivalent to one abortion every other year for all women using the pill. Dr. Flores' estimate means that while traditional abortion clinics will kill approximately 1.2 million babies over the course of the next year, the innocent little pill will claim the lives of almost 4 times that number. In the very first chapter of Jeremiah, God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." You see, really, birth control is nothing more than our evil human attempt at managing something that is so infinitely bigger than ourselves. And in the end, we're faced with the reality that our solution has become both physically detrimental and morally bankrupt. Will we condemn that drug that twists an arm or a leg while condoning the one that takes the whole child? Thalidomide appeared successful until the world saw the horrific deformity it was actually causing. In the same way, the pill appears successful because there is nothing to see. But the fact that no child is born doesn't mean a child never lived. Today we've had a good look at the facts. Of course, the truth about birth control probably isn't something that you'll read in the news or be told in your doctor's office. But we can't allow our culture's shifting standards to begin to shift ours as well. We must be willing to stand up for life from the very beginning. Because a life will always be a life. And as such, it is always worth defending. Thank you.